Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl, and this is what I read in May. The funniest thing about my May reading is that for some reason during the month, I didn't feel like I was reading that much. And then I have a little title page that I do in my reading journal that I go back and I fill out at the end of every month. And it has the number of books I read, how many were off on my unread shelf, things like that. And when I went back to count them all to put in the information and realized I read 20 books in May, I was so surprised. I don't know why I didn't think I'd read that many. Some of them are books that I started in April and finished in May. And some of them are smaller picture books or kid books. But still, it was really surprising that I read that many in May. And it was a really good reading month as well. One of the main reasons I read so much was because of the Hikeathon readathon that was put on by the Brightside Girl. And so I'm going to go through all of the prompts for that first, and then I'll talk about the other books I read in May that had nothing to do with the readathon. I made a video talking about what I was going to read for Hikeathon, and quite a few of those ended up changing. I was able to complete the whole readathon and get all of the badges on my little sash, plus all of the activity badges as well. So I did visit a little free library. I actually visited quite a few. I did go to a park and read outside and have a picnic and do an outside activity and go on a hike. Although the hike, I am cheating a little bit because I took my youngest daughter up in one of the mountains pretty far up to a lake that I used to love hiking around. And when we got up there, it was still snowy. There was a ton of snow on the ground and there was a sign saying not to go past a certain point. So we did go up to that point, but then we stopped. So it was a very short, more of a walk than a hike, but I still counted it because there wasn't any other opportunity during that 2-week time period to do that. So now I'm going to go through all of the book badges. So for the post-apocalypse book, I listened to the book Dust by Hugh Howey. This was book number 3 in I don't know if it's called the Wool books, because I think the first one was called Wool. But I just think of them as Silo because they are the books that the TV show Silo is based on. I watched the show with Doug and he told me just to start on book 2. I listened to book 2 and I wasn't a huge fan of it. I thought it was okay. So I wasn't that excited about listening to book 3 in May, and I might not have gotten to it if it weren't for Hikeathon. But because it had that post-apocalyptic feel to it, I was able to use it for that prompt, so I did listen to it. And I liked it so much better than book 2. It took us back to the characters that I loved from the TV show and gave more of that, whereas the second book kind of went back in time, which I guess which was important to find out information, but this may be different when you're reading it versus listening, I don't know. But I felt like they might have been stronger books if it went back and forth between what happened in the past and with the characters that you cared about in the first part. But I don't know, maybe not. But I did enjoy it. I thought it was pretty good. There were a few things in the way it ended that I was really sad about, and so that kept me from loving it. But I did think it was good, and I am excited to see it done on the TV show eventually. Hopefully it won't be too long. For the seasonal read prompt, originally I had planned on reading Emma M. Lyon since it usually covers a season, but I decided I would use the prompt better probably if I read something that took place in the season that we're in right now, so spring into summer. And so I read Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. This is the book about his trip to the top of Mount Everest, and it took place in May, so it was perfect for the season. I'm not going to review this except that to say that I liked it. I didn't love everything about it. That you can hear more about what I thought about it in my video about books about Mount Everest that I put up last week. For Mountain on the Cover, I also changed the prompt because of a book that I had found at one of the bookshops I've visited lately. It's Eruption by Michael Crichton and James Patterson, and obviously it's got the volcano mountain on the front. And I was just really in the mood to read this and get right into it to see if I would like it or not. So I decided this would be changed for the Mountain on the Cover prompt. When I first started reading it, it really felt like a Michael Crichton book to me. It started out with, one scene that was interesting and made you question what is happening, what is going on, and then went into the future a little ways and started introducing the characters that were going to be crucial to the actual story. And as it was going along, I was definitely wrapped up. There was a lot of science, like there usually is in a Michael Crichton book. The characters definitely felt like Crichton characters. If you've read a lot of Crichton, you'll probably know what I mean by that, but I'm not quite sure how to describe it. It also had the short chapters, so you really feel like it's fast-paced, you're moving through it, but it felt a little bit more, for lack of a better word, punchy than Crichton's books usually are. So what I mean by that is a lot of times when you read a thriller book, sometimes it feels like, here's this big scene, you're reading and then there's something really dramatic and then it ends. And then the next scene starts and something really dramatic and then it ends. Like it's just cliffhanger after cliffhanger after cliffhanger in short chapters. There's like a rhythm to it, I guess. And Crichton has that to an extent, but not as much as a lot of the other thriller books that are similar to his that I've read. And this one felt more than his books usually do, and I'm sure that was the Patterson influence. I also didn't feel like it had as much scientific explanation as Crichton's books usually have. And while you don't always really get to know the characters in a lot of depth in his books when there's a lot of action going on, you do usually get to know them more than you did in this book. So I also wondered if that was a Patterson thing. Like, I felt like a lot of the characters could have been interchanged and I wouldn't have known the difference. There's a couple of main girls that I only knew different because their names. And a few of the military guys, I had no idea who it was until it said their name. The main character, the main volcanologist, I think that's what you call them, I liked him and I felt like there was a little bit more depth to him. But even then, I feel like it could have gone further with him. And then there was a young teenager in it that I thought was going to be a bigger part of the story. And I do feel like if Crichton had written the whole thing, he would have been. Because I felt like the beginning fleshed him out a little bit, and then we never really got as much from him later. So basically, at the beginning, I really felt like I couldn't tell the difference between is Crichton writing or is Patterson writing. It just felt like a Crichton book. As the book went along, I still couldn't necessarily tell you for sure what parts Michael Crichton wrote and which ones James Patterson wrote, but I could tell that there was a difference from Michael Crichton's normal rhythm and voice. One of the biggest things for me with that was that there were a couple of deaths that were very unnecessary. And I know, or at least I'm pretty certain, that if Michael Crichton had written the whole thing, that that those deaths either wouldn't have happened, or if they had, there would have been something that would have come of it. Some information or moving along the story somehow would have happened. But it was completely pointless. And I did feel that way about a lot of the things that happened in the last part of the book. I felt like a lot of things were building up to the end and then had absolutely nothing to do with the end. And I have never felt that way reading a Michael Crichton book before. So that has to be the Patterson parts that added to that. I've only read James Patterson books for kids and teens before, and I wasn't a huge fan of the ones that I did read. I thought they were okay. I've never read any of his adult books, so I don't know if I would enjoy him or not, but I definitely don't think that he writes on the same level as Michael Crichton. Just based on this, I could be totally wrong because maybe Michael Crichton wasn't on his A game with the parts he wrote. I don't know. His wife said that he had the basis, the outline of this book. He visited Pompeii, he visited Hawaii, he did a lot of research, a lot of interviews like he always did with his books. And then there was a partial manuscript and then a lot of notes. And then James Patterson came in and took all of that. So I really don't know how many of the things that were done James Patterson wrote, but that Michael Crichton had notes for, but maybe it wasn't completely fleshed out, or maybe Michael Crichton made a decision that wasn't typical Crichton. I don't know. But I definitely felt like it wasn't as strong as it could have been. If it had been written 30 years ago and Crichton had written the whole thing himself, I think this would have been a 5-star book for me because the idea was very interesting and I think it could have been so much better. There also were quite a few point of views at the end of the book that were really random. People that didn't exist until all of a sudden were in their point of view at the end. And that felt weird to me too because there were so many characters introduced throughout the book that it could have gone back to that it didn't. I'm not sure why that decision was made. One of my favorite things while I was reading it was that I was also reading a Mark Twain book, which I'll talk about in a minute. And in it, and this book mentioned Mark Twain from the Mark Twain book I was reading in it. And I was reading them at exactly the same time. So that was really cool. And I did really enjoy the reading experience. So don't get me wrong with saying it's not as good as it could have been, or that it didn't feel like a fully Crichton book. I still did really enjoy the experience. It was just that afterward, the longer I sat with it, the more I could pick apart some of the things, and I wasn't completely satisfied with the ending. And I would say that that was mainly because of the unnecessary deaths. If the deaths that I felt were unnecessary hadn't happened or had happened in a different way, I think that would have also impacted my overall feeling of the book. So I think that that was a really bad choice, but I would still give it around 3.5 stars. I still really enjoyed it. I still really enjoyed the reading experience. You know, that's the hard part. If it had been written by somebody I didn't have any expectations from, I probably would have only thought positive things and just said, oh, well, there's a couple of things I didn't like, but it's just, I expect so much from Michael Crichton. And so it's hard not to go into the experience with those expectations. For a book with elemental magic, I read Drake Hall because dragons and fire. And this is the second book in the Secrets of Ormdale by Christina Bear. I really liked this. However, I did not think it was as strong as the first one. It may have just been a mood thing, that maybe I wasn't in the mood for it as much as I was with the first one, or that I had such high expectations of it because of how much I enjoyed the first one, but I still did really like it. And I will continue on with the series. I'm just not in a rush to do it, I guess. Part of that also could be because it was a long time. I read the first book last fall, so it had been quite a while in between the two books. So I think that before I read the third book, I might reread the first and second to have them really fresh in my mind right beforehand and see if that affects it. And then for the prompt road trip, I read Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. I read this right after reading Into Thin Air. And because I didn't love Into Thin Air as much as Under the Banner of Heaven, I wasn't sure how I would feel about Into the Wild. So this was going to be kind of the tiebreaker to see if I really loved his writing or if Under the Banner of Heaven was just because of the subject matter that I put it so high up. But actually this one I liked as much as that one. It was a lot shorter than the other two. It also did not have pictures, which I talked about in the Into the Thin Air in the Mount Everest video. And I wished it had pictures, but I did go online after finishing this and I researched the boy that this is about and looked up pictures of all the things. And I did watch the movie with Doug after finishing it. This tells the story of a young man who comes from kind of a well-to-do family. His dad worked with NASA, but he always kind of felt differently about wealth and what he wanted to do with his life. And after college, he kind of pretends to his parents that he's going to take a break for a little while and then go to probably Harvard Law School or something like that. But instead, he takes off in his car and he doesn't tell anyone where he's going. He emptied his whole bank account of the rest of a trust that he had that was paying for college. I believe it was around $25,000, and gave it to his favorite charity that would feed people. Then he took off in his car and drove west. And eventually, he did abandon his car. He burned his money. He would get little jobs here and there to pay for what he needed in the moment, and then just hitchhiked and, depended on the kindness of others. And he met quite a few people along the way that I think affected him, but he also affected them. Chris McCandless is the boy that it's about, but during most of the book, most of his journey, he was going by Alex, and eventually he would leave notes places and he would say Alex Supertramp. I really liked him. There was definitely things about him that, were immature. I was really sad going into it knowing that he would die, because that's the whole story. It says, in April 1992, a young man from a well-to-do family hitchhiked to Alaska and walked alone in the wilderness north of Mount McKinley. His name was Christopher Johnson McCandless. He had given $25,000 in savings to charity, abandoned his car and most of his possessions, burned all the cash in his wallet, and invented a new life for himself. 4 months later, his decomposed body was found by a moose hunter. He really just wanted to live a life depending on only himself and what he could find in nature. There were quite a few parts of the book that really stuck out to me that were meaningful, especially with some of the people that he met and the experiences he had with them. There was an older man who, while he was at war, his wife and child were killed by a drunk driver. He actually asked Alex or Chris if he could adopt him. And he said to him, well, we can talk about that when I get back from Alaska. But this man, through Alex's influence on him, he did end up selling everything and getting a little camper and spending his life going around and doing all the things that he had put off his whole life that he wanted to do. There were conversations about God between them. I really liked the older man, and I liked their relationship and kind of the influence they both had on each other. In the movie, that was my favorite part as well. Alex was, I think, a spiritual person. I would say not religious, definitely. I don't know that he would be what people would say, oh, he's a biblical Christian or anything like that, but he did believe in God. And so it was interesting to kind of see where that would show up for him. They also had some notes, journals, books that were written in the margins, so to go off of. So that's how we know kind of what happened on his trip and what happened once he was in the Alaska wilderness and on his own. The most, I think, heartbreaking part of it was that he did decide at one point to leave, but he couldn't get across the river, and he didn't know that just a few miles down the river there was a place he could have crossed safely. So he went back to the bus, and then soon after he died. And that is so sad to me. The movie was really well done, very close to the story, and in fact they did include a little bit more of the cruelty of his dad, but I wouldn't recommend the movie because of content issues. There is a lot of content that I didn't expect going in. Also, there is a scene where he cuts up a moose, and that was something that happened, and it is filmed very graphically, so much so that even Doug couldn't watch it. So when I was talking to Abby, my oldest daughter, about this, and she said, well, if the whole idea was that he did it, and it ended up being something where he wasn't able to use the moose the way he wanted to, and he was so devastated and said it was one of the most tragic moments of his life, that showing it so graphically was probably meant to make you understand more why it was so devastating to him that he had just killed this animal this way and then wasn't able to use it. And I think she's probably right about that that's why, I think it was Sean Penn that directed it, of why he filmed it that way. But it still isn't easy to watch. And it is very long, and I would say it's a very heavy movie because of how it ends and how you know it's going to end. I wouldn't watch it again, but there were some quotes I wrote down from it. They were from other people, quotes that he used. One of them was, "For children are innocent and love justice, while most of us are wicked and naturally prefer mercy." And that's from G.K. Chesterton. And then there was one, "Courage and strength are not without prudence." And that was Edward Whymper. I would say that there also was some language in the book, although the movie did have more than the book did. So it wouldn't be for everybody, but I was very interested and enthralled by the story and by him as a person. For survival read, I read One Wrong Step by Jennifer A. Nielsen. This is another Mount Everest book. This is a couple of teenagers that are trying to save their dads and some other people that are caught in an avalanche on Everest. So this one, you can also get my review on my Mount Everest video. For characters on a journey, I read The Mystery of the Blue Train by Agatha Christie. This man buys some jewels that a lot of people want, and he gives them to his daughter. He also is finding out that she is upset because her husband is having an affair, so he is trying to convince her to get a divorce. What he doesn't really know is that the daughter is also having an affair. She goes on the blue train to go meet the man that she's been having an affair with. The husband ends up being on the blue train as well. The girl he was having an affair with is on the blue train, and Poirot is on the blue train. And there's also another girl who has worked for an elderly woman for a long time, and when the woman died, she left all of her money to this girl, and so all of a sudden she is wealthy, and she is going to visit some relatives. There is a murder on board the train, and so the rest of the book is trying to figure out who did it, and I had so many theories, and I did not get it right. I really liked it. I thought it was really good. I didn't like it as much as some of her other books, but I thought it was really interesting and, fast-paced like usual, and kept my attention. There was just one thing I think that kept me from loving it, and that was one of the romances in it that end up happening. I was not very excited about that. I was not on board with a romance at the end of the book. So that kind of took it down a little bit, but I did enjoy it. For a book set in nature, this is where the Mark Twain book came in. I was reading Roughing It by Mark Twain when the month started, and I decided just to keep reading it and to finish it and use it for that prompt rather than reading something new for the prompt. A semi-autobiographical account of Mark Twain's early adventures in Western America. It's the first of several travel books that he ended up writing. So most of this book is about mining, and it's in, his attempts at gold and silver mining, which led to his becoming a paper millionaire for 10 days. He gets involved in real estate speculation amid his time in Nevada and California. He details his trip to Salt Lake City and encounters with the Brigham Young Mormons. And at the end of the book, he travels to Hawaii and describes viewing the lava flows and eruptions from the volcanoes that are active even today. I did really enjoy this book. He has this underlying sense of humor in all of his books. And I've read so many Mark Twain books in a row over the last couple of months that I'm better at picking it up now than I would have been. And you see that same kind of humor throughout all of the books I've read by him. The part about mining, it was interesting to me at first, and then it just felt like it was starting to drag on. I got really tired of the mining. I wished it was shorter and that I didn't have to read it and that we could just be done with that part. So my favorite parts of it were the parts when he was in Utah and dealing with Mormons, for personal reasons, and then also the Hawaii part, because I found that kind of interesting. And like I said, it matched up with the reading of Eruption that I was doing. It's always fun, I think, when books feel like they're talking to each other. There were a couple of parts that were racially uncomfortable, that the terms people were using for other people, the terms he used or descriptions that he used for people were uncomfortable. You can definitely tell it's, what was happening at the time. And there were other times when he would be talking really positively about someone, but still be using the racial terms that we wouldn't, have acceptable nowadays. And so I didn't enjoy those parts, but I also can take it with feeling like that's one way you learn about history and how things have been. I won't go into everything about the Mormons because that would just take too long, but I do feel like he was fair, but also very accurate in his description. He didn't romanticize the pioneer women there and the different people. He talked about Brigham's avenging angels, which were the people that Brigham Young would have kill people that a lot of people try to pretend like didn't happen or don't know it happened. And he did talk about the Book of Mormon. He did get one and he read it, and his description of it is pretty spot on. I would say that for the most part, I really liked it. For the set at camp prompt, I did end up using the book I had planned on using, which I was hoping I would find something else to use, but I didn't, and it was getting close, and I really wanted to get all my badges, so I still used the picture book. I used the Berenstain Bears Go to Camp. So that was really fun. I love the Berenstain Bears. I've loved them since I was a child. I've been collecting their books my whole life. And so it's always fun to just sit down for a few minutes, even by myself, and read through a Berenstain Bear book. For Leaves on the Cover, I originally was going to be using a different book, but when the readathon started, I was still reading All Manner of Things by Susie Finkbeiner. And since it has trees with leaves, I decided that I would just keep reading it and use it for the prompt. And this book was so good. I loved it so much. But I don't want to get into it too much because I have a video coming out in a few weeks about this and a few other books that I read in May that will be a themed video, and I'm going to go into a full review there. Just know that I loved it. Again, as we were getting toward the end of the month, I wanted to earn those badges. So for the prompt Shoe on the Cover, I used the Sword in the Stone graphic novel because you see his shoes, and this was just a graphic version of the Disney movie Sword in the Stone. It was exactly the movie, and I love that movie, so I really loved the book. And for a book with woods in the title, originally I had thought about using a book with the word tree, but then I decided that I did actually have a few books that had wood in the title. So I read A Wolf in the North Woods. This is by Heather Horn. It's from the Good and the Beautiful library, and it's more of a easy reader. So not complete picture book, but it is short. And it was just a cute little book about wolves. And there wasn't too much to it. For the other books I read this month, I'm going to go through some of the monthly challenges. For my Agatha Christie year-long challenge, of course, I did read the Agatha Christie book. For A Year of Maud with Chantel, May's book was Anne's House of Dreams. And this is one of my 3 very favorite books in the Anne of Green Gables series. We have Anne finally getting married and going to live in her first little home, the House of Dreams. And we also see her begin to have children. Spoiler alert, I'm going to put this down, and when I'm done with the spoiler, if you haven't read the book, when I put the book back up, I'll be done with the spoiler. Anne's first baby, Joy, does die pretty soon after birth. And so we see that in the story, and we also see how Anne reacts to it. And sometimes I hear people talking about how once Anne has kids, that she's different and there's just something different about her. She doesn't have the same spark as she did when she was younger. But I think that a lot of people are missing the fact that none of us are the same when we're adults as we were when we were children and teenagers. We have that same core to us, but our life experiences do change a lot about us. Having her child die, there was a part of her that will never be the same. And I think that Lucy Maud Montgomery was brilliant in showing that. And from what I've read, she probably wrote that pretty soon around the same time or after she also lost a child. And so she would have really understood what it was like and what you would feel like having gone through that. And I think it's a really important part of the story. It also helps Anne to really relate to someone else in the story who is having a really hard life. So, okay, so spoiler over. You see quite a few of the people in this little area that they live in. We have Miss Cornelia, who hates men, but it's done in kind of a funny way, and she's a lot like Rachel Lynde. We have Captain Jim, who is one of my favorite characters in all of the Anne books, and we just get to see how Anne what she does, where she comes into a place and she connects with some people really well, the kindred spirits, or in this book, they start calling it the race that knows Joseph. It's just so delightful. It's so beautiful, I think, to see how she connects with other people and the things that happen because of those connections. I loved that it talked a lot about Gog and Magog, her little china dogs by the fireplace, how she was given those at the beginning of the book, and then it talks about them a few times because I recently got my own and I've wanted some for a very long time, but finding the ones that are the green and white ones, like she writes in her book, that are based on her grandfather's china dogs that were green and white, or finding the cream ones that I think they were beige and cream that she owned. They are extremely expensive. And so I found some cheap knockoffs, and they are similar to hers, but smaller. And I have them in my library next to my little fireplace. And so I also named them Gog and Magog. And that was just so much fun to be reading that part right after I got it, because then I was sitting in my library looking at my dogs, reading about them. That was a really fun thing. She said, "Just fancy those lovely old dogs sitting by the fireplace in my house of dreams." There were so many quotes I could have lifted from this. One of them, "Tears can be happy as well as sad. My very happiest moments have been when I had tears in my eyes. I'll willingly accept the sorrow of life with its joy." One of the times when it was describing Captain Jim was a high-souled, simple-minded old man with eternal youth in his eyes and heart. He had passed through many hardships and sorrows which had marked his body as well as his soul. The spirit shining through that rugged tenement beautified it so wholly. I could keep going. There were so many quotes from it. I loved it. I loved every minute of reading this book again, like I always do. And I've heard from other people that read it this month that there's a lot of people that don't love it as much as I do, and that's fine. But it is one of those books in the series that really speak to me. So I loved it. I also used that for the Reading the Classics 2025 from Anne at In Search of Wonder for rereading a favorite. And for the scavenger hunt for that, there was childhood, high school, and recent history. So I marked off childhood because there were some kids. But other than that, I couldn't mark off anything else with that. For the Read Your Bookshelf 2025 challenge for May was also a favorite. And for that, it wasn't to reread a favorite, but just a book that's a favorite. So I used a book from what is quickly becoming one of my very favorite series of all time, and that's Emma M. Lyon. I read volume 5 with the read along that I'm doing. We're doing it one a month. So that was for that as well. As usual, it was fully delightful and fun. I loved it. And I love the characters. You get to know a couple characters in this one a little bit more. I had a favorite in the first 4, and in this book, there were 2 others that gave him a little bit of a run for his money. But I love this series so much. I feel like it's flawless. I don't know if it will stay that way. I hope it does. Some of the quotes that I wrote down: "Some things must wring out every last ounce before the end. In the end, all is mended." I won't say too much more about it because that would spoil some of the other things for the earlier books. But yeah, if you haven't started reading Emma M. Lyon yet, you should start reading Emma M. Lyon. For Jane Reed's Christian Fiction Challenge for May, it was set in the South. And for that, I read All We Thought We Knew. This is a book that deals with World War II and Vietnam, and it takes place in Tennessee mostly. And this is also another book that I will be talking about thoroughly in my upcoming video. So I won't give a review right now, but I did really like it. I did read a few other books that weren't for any challenges in May. I did finish The Secret Garden with my daughter. We've been reading this since March, and we finally finished it at the beginning of May, along with the Secret Garden devotional. I have to say I've always liked the Secret Garden, but I loved it even more this time reading it with my daughter. There are some things that I don't always love about it, but I feel like it's such a good redemptive story, and it will have a really special place in my heart now after reading it to her and also doing the devotional. The devotionals by Rachel Dodge are so good, and this one was as well. I really loved the experience of reading the 2 back to back. We would read the chapter in Secret Garden and then read the chapter about that chapter in the devotional, and it was just really great. It made me want to get outside more, have a garden, all the things, but I loved it. I read Tom Felton's autobiography, Beyond the Wand, and this I really enjoyed. He's a really good storyteller, and it was very interesting. It was fun to see behind the scenes, and he did talk behind the scenes so much. He gave so much good information, fun information. You felt like you got to know a few of the people better. He's very honest about his life and how he later had kind of a breakdown and he ended up in a rehab. And that was something I had never heard about. It was off my radar, I guess. I never heard that he had gone through that. And I really enjoyed his thoughts on that and how he got through it. So I thought that was really good. And there is some swearing in it, but it's not as excessive as a lot of the other memoirs that I've read from actors and actresses. So yeah, if you're a big Harry Potter fan or Tom Felton fan, you might enjoy it. I thought it was really good. As a family, we also finished 12 Unlikely Heroes by John MacArthur. We were reading that every Sunday, and we've been reading that for quite a while. We finally finished that. I learned a lot from it and really enjoyed it, as usual with John MacArthur. I feel like he is a really good writer and he's very knowledgeable, and so I always learn new things. With my daughter in homeschool, we also read What a Character, Extraordinary Animal Heroes by Marilyn Boyer. This is put out by Master Books, and I did really enjoy the stories in it. But the fact that they used AI for all of the art in it took it down a notch for us, because I don't know why, but I feel like curriculum companies and publishers shouldn't do that. I feel like they should be incorporating real artists to do these kind of things. And I think it would have been much better if they'd had real photographs or real art, not AI. There were a few stories in it that felt a little bit wonky in the way they were written, and so we did wonder if they'd used AI for the text sometimes as well. So that made it less enjoyable, not knowing for sure. But there were quite a few animals that we would read their story and then we would go on YouTube and watch a video about them, and that was really fun because there were so many cute stories of animals that were heroes in different wars. And so that was really enjoyable to hear their stories. Another book that I really loved was The Journey to Jesus by Brandy Bronson. I can't hold that up because I lent it to my mom, but this is a woman who has also left the Mormon church and is a Christian, and it was her story. It wasn't like a lot of the books that, kind of like the one I'm writing, telling basically our whole story. She tells a little bit of her story, but it's mostly about, this is what I looked up, this is what I used to believe, and this is what the Bible showed me is different. And so it's mainly a theological book breaking down different beliefs of the Mormon church with Christianity. So it was quite different than a lot of the other ones I've read. Some of the things I wrote down from that: Jesus died for us over 2,000 years ago, and a church that was born 200 years ago that posits a distorted view of Christ and his gospel should not and cannot have the final say in your walk with God. Another one: the temple veil was torn from top to bottom when Christ died for us, and this was symbolic, God's new relationship with humanity, yet the LDS church built temples and put the veil right back up. And that was actually something that really stuck out to me when I started learning different things and understanding the Bible more, because I was like, oh, we put the veil back up. We have to go through it with secret handshakes and words instead of it being open to us the way it was as soon as Jesus died. I felt like it was a really good book, really meaningful to me. I think it is informative. Two of my favorite quotes from it were toward the very end: regardless of how much one has sacrificed for a belief system, if it isn't true, it needs to be rejected. Because I think that that's one of the hardest things a lot of us deal with is, I've given so much to this church. How can I give it up now? And then the last one: it turns out that the Bible didn't need a restoration at all. It just needs to be read. I loved that. I thought it was a great book. And the last one is Everything Else in the Universe by Tracy Holzer. This is another Vietnam book, so you can probably guess the theme of the upcoming video. I will be giving a full review of this coming up, but this one I also really love. So as far as the whole month goes, my favorite books were it was really hard to pick a favorite book because I loved so many of the books I read this month. I felt like I had more 5-star books this month than I have had for as long as I can remember. So obviously Anne's House of Dreams, but that is a reread, and I usually pick only new books to say for my favorite book of the month. And Emma M. Lyon was definitely up there, but it ended up going to All Manner of Things by Susie Finkbeiner. This book was really impactful to me. I would love to hear what your favorite book in May was, and if you also read a lot, or if you read a lot of 5 stars, what your reading experience was like in May, and if you've read any of these books or are interested in them now.